It's after lunch and people are sleepy, wanting to take a siesta, but we expect that more will run in over the time, so I'll get the introductions out of the way. My name is Steve Sawyer, Secretary General of the Global Wind Energy Council, and I have the pleasure of having with me on the panel this afternoon, representatives of three of the most dynamic and most exciting markets in the world. Lauro Fiuza from Brazil, Wojciech Seknarski from Poland, and Johan van den Berg from South Africa. We'll go alphabetically, so we'll start with Brazil. Let me introduce Lauro, who's my old friend, former chairman of or president of the Brazilian Wind Energy Association, IWPC, but he's also a mechanical engineer and has got a degree from the Harvard Business School and has been involved in many businesses, and now is a very successful wind entrepreneur, as well as continuing both on my board of directors and on the board of directors of IWPC. And Brazil, as we know, is one of the fastest growing markets. Well, it is, in percentage terms, certainly the fastest growing market in the world, and a great success story in leading the market in Latin America for the last 5 years, and certainly for the next 5 years. Lauro, your presentation, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Steve, for your presentation. Brazil has a very nice story on developing the wind power generation in their matrix. As you know, Brazil is one of the leaders in the world in renewables, basically because of the big hydroelectric dams we start doing since 1950. It was a nice decision. And we came with the idea to develop wind farms in Brazil to take advantage of the very good wind we have in the beginning of this century. And on the first moment, as we had some difficulty to make policymakers to understand that we couldn't lose the opportunity to develop a wind power generation in the country, besides the fact that we had great potential to explore in big hydro. But the facts are, since the change of climate in the world, Brazil nowadays is facing a big problem with the lack of water. No rain, no rivers. So in this moment of the last 5 years, wind power generation had become a very important actor in the matrix. As I'm going to show you, we made a good point in bringing wind power generation to the country. Nowadays, Brazil had reached the 10th position, so we are the number 10 in wind power generation accumulated. In the beginning of our journey in 2002, we had nothing. So it's a big increase of the last 5 years. And last year, we came to be the number 4 in the world in adding power to the matrix. So after China, Germany, USA, we come a little big in front of India. And this is the situation today. We are in 2015. At the end of this year, we're gonna have 9.96 thousand megawatts of wind power running. And with the PPAs we are developing now, we're gonna reach 2019 with 16.5 thousand. But the fact is, we are adding more than 2.7, maybe 3,000 megawatts per year. And we hope to put in 2015 in new PPAs more than 3, maybe a little more than that. So it shows us accumulating, and we can think in having 2023 more than 25.8 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts of wind power generating electricity. This is the situation all over the country. So you can see on Northeast, we have more than 2, 4, 7 states adding power, and 3 other states in the south of Brazil, the 2 different locations. And the wind in Northeast is much stronger than on the south. But besides the fact of the wind velocity, on the south we have good conditions also because of the transmission line they have over there. And our position between all the other type of power generation, we are still very small, but we are reaching 6% of the metrics. And maybe in 2020, 2023, we're going to be more than 12. This is a big increase. And on the beginning, we have a kind of testing phase. Brazil started with a program called ProInfa with 1.5 thousand megawatts to understand and to try to study better our winds and this new industry for us. And this first program was based on a feed-in tariff that was and is still used in Europe. After this program, we start doing differently, very differently. Open bids where lower cost would win the PPAs. And you can see what it have done with the prices. So we start with more than $80 per megawatt. And nowadays we are in an average from $51 to $52 per megawatt. This year we're going to have at least 3 auctions. And the new established price, so the top price, and the way these auctions are made is a top-down reverse auction, you see? They establish a top price, and from that price, the auction is going down until they reach the amount of PPAs they want to sign with the demand needs. So this top price for the next auction is $56. So a little increase on the average we had before. If we take this chart to analyze what is going on the left side, we have all sources in the auctions. And we had in 2012 absolutely different year. So it was a typical year. If you take this out, Brazil is adding an average of 5.5 gigawatt per year. And you can see on this average, we are making almost 50% of the new capacity adding in the country. On the right side, you see wind alone, we are in an average of 2.7 in a total of 5.5 gigawatt. These are the 3 auctions that has been established for this year. One in April, another one in July, and another one in November. So on April, we have wind and biomass. In July, we're going to have wind, small hydro, biomass, and natural gas thermal. In August, we're going to have only solar. But in November again, we're going to have wind and solar. So that's why we are optimistic and say that at least 3,000 megawatts of wind is going to be hired. One very interesting thing that show us wind farms all over the country. And of course, with transmission line, we need roads, we need ports, several things to help us to low down the cost of investing in these wind farms. This is the range, or the amount of companies we have in Abiolica today. They are around 100 companies. That makes to be one of the more active association in the electric industry in the country. And this is one of the parks, by far the most beautiful one I have made on the coast. Letting to you to see this vision. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lalo. I think before taking questions from the floor, I think one of the things that's interesting about Brazil is that it's sort of become the poster child for auctions. There have been many attempts to auction wind power before. Most of them didn't work very well. Well, the one in Quebec worked okay. But yours has really been the driver for the rage of auctions, and now I know a number of countries, including Wojciech's and many European countries, are now looking to develop auction systems, but with very, very different operating parameters than yours. What advice would you have for European countries that are looking to introduce auctioning into their renewable energy procurement?
Of course, as a very young industry in the country, we had a lot of adventurers coming into the industry. They saw a very easy way to be on the industry, and without no conditions, no economic, they are not so strong as we need to be in this business. So very high investment for long-term return. So a lot of fear we had with this kind of investors on the business. Of course, every year the policymakers have changed the requirements they ask for these companies to be on the auctions. So you have to be very cautious on establish level of conditions for the companies to be in the auctions. Of course, on the auctions, everybody is trying to lower the price and taking some more risk than acceptable. But you have to show that you are strong enough to be on this competition. Instead of feed-in tariff that everybody can be there, and is establish the price and establish the incentive on that. So the first thing I would recommend is to think about very serious the requirements for the companies to be part of the auctions and show some experience, not only in the wind, of course, in a case like Brazil where everybody is starting on this business. We are 8 years old. But in another business, companies in the utilities, companies in the engineering companies, things like that. So you have to take care on this requirement.
The other thing that I think it's important to note is that I heard the discussion this morning where of the permits that were granted here in Turkey, 60% of them or so had been taken up. The difference with the auctions, at least in Brazil, if you win the bid, you sign a contract for 20 years, you're going to supply that power for 20 years. Whether you build a wind farm or not, you're obliged to supply that power. So you better be very serious before you put in a bid, or at least a bid that's going to win. Okay, questions from the floor? I think we have some microphones wandering around. A gentleman here in the front, the microphone is coming to you, I believe. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
While the microphone comes to him, another thing we have in Brazil today is to participate in the auction, you have to make a deposit of 2% of the total investment you are supposed to do. And to sign the PPA, you have to put 10% of that as a guarantee for that. So it's a lot of risk.
Açık değil ki, mikrofon açık değil. Oğlum mikrofon açık değil ama. How about now? I think it was my fault, sorry. Well, thank you for the presentation. It was very inspiring, actually. I didn't know much about Brazil's energy policies. But only thing I know about Brazil, about renewable energies, is that you're very good at biofuels. Am I right?
I'm not listening. Can you get it? Oh, yeah.
The question was, Brazil is, asking you to confirm that biofuels, you're very good at doing biofuels in Brazil.
Brazil can be very strong in biofuel because we have land, we have agriculture, so we can use all the garbage from sugarcane to produce energy. So Brazil is very lucky because we have all the natural conditions to be self-sufficient in power. So we have area for agriculture, we have sun to produce food and biofuel, we have wind because of the sun, and we still have rivers for hydro, so we have everything. And biofuel is something that is of course very strong in the country.
What I was trying to get at is that since you're very good at biofuels and there are a lot of companies producing biofuels, do they have interest investing in wind energy?
Don't get it. No, not at all. No, at all.
Well, that's
because normally all these companies are on the interior. You see, and we don't have wind to compete, to make them to compete on the best sites near the coast or on the mountains.
Okay. So that's my end of my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah, Paulo.
I couldn't understand.
It was easy.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It works now. Thank you very much for your presentation. Can I ask you a couple of sensitive questions on the Brazilian system? One, the mix and the auctions is very centrally planned. The criticism which is sometimes made that this is decided, how is that decided? And the more direct question, are you happy with the expansion plans of the government, or do you think that wind should have a bigger role? This is question number one. The second is about how long these contracts are. Because of course, the ones that are discussing long-term contracts say, you then lock in yourself for 20 years. What if a crisis arrives or energy efficiency is much better? Who pays? So the direct question would be, if the contract would be 15 years long or 10 years long, would you still making a good business in Brazil from an industry perspective or not? Is this being discussed in Brazil? Thank you.
Good question, Paulo. And I saw your presentation today. I was talking with Steve. We need you to open some minds over there. We're going to have Brazil Wind Power Conference in September, and I really want you to be there and to make the same speech we did in this morning. So of course we're not happy with the situation today because they separate two things: auction for wind farms and auction for transmission line later or after the auction for wind farms. This make discontinuated situation. For example, my company, we just finished a wind farm in a region in the state of Ceará. We had 5 years to build it. And the company that had owned the transmission line and to do had 5 years to make it. They still didn't make it. So we're going to stay 1 year waiting for them to finish the transmission line. So this doesn't make any sense. You know, what we have discussion with policymakers to, there is a company, there is an agency, it's a planning energy agency, is make them to decide to build a transmission line or to make the auction for transmission line before us. We, as a developers, we are very fast. We have major of our wind farms we can make in 2.5 years. And for environment situation, for requirements to get the license, the transmission line take more time than us. So they have to start it before. What the guy says to us is, yeah, well, we're not making the transmission line without knowing who is making the wind farms over there. This is not true because after 8 years, this agency has the whole picture where everybody is developing wind farms to go to the auctions. So they can anticipate their decision. So this is one problem we have. And the second thing that you asked, we have a system that compensate every year the value of the money. Is adjustment, you know? And it goes very close to the inflation. So taking a contract for 20 years doesn't make any problem for us. By the contrary, it's very good. So, of course, when we have the situation like we had this year with a very big change on the rate between reals and the dollar, it affects on the moment everybody. But then the lines goes to cross again, and year by year they establish the same value. In other hand, if we have a very short contract, the price of energy has to be higher because you have to compensate your investment in a shorter time. So 10 years is very short, 20 years is very good.
Okay. I think in order to do justice to our other two panelists and the other two markets, that's all the time we have for Brazil now. And I would like, but we could obviously talk about it for the rest of the afternoon and most of tomorrow. But if you want to follow up, I know Lauro and his colleague Marcio will be here, at least tonight and some tomorrow. Let me introduce Wojciech Sitnarski. He's the president of the Polish Wind Energy Association. He's been involved in the renewable energy market in Poland for more than a decade, for 13 years, mostly on the investment advisory and management side of things. And he has his own company now, as well on exactly those subjects, as well as leading the Polish Wind Energy Association, which has been able to achieve very good results in very difficult political conditions. But I'll let him tell you about it. Wojciech.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction, and thank you to all of the organizers for inviting us here and sharing with us our experience of developing wind industry in Europe. I will be representing the European community here this afternoon. As we have little time, I heard from Steven that I have to make my presentation in 15 minutes. I will get straight to the topic. Polish Wind Energy Association is the biggest organization of all the companies involved in the wind industry in Poland. We exist since 1999. Today we have more than 100 members, and we are also the member of the European Wind Energy Association. I want to say a few words about Poland, as this country may not be so well known to all of you. We are located in the central eastern part of Europe, but this is the eastern part of European Union. We are not part of the Eurozone. We've got our own currency. And we are not very far from Turkey. As you see, there is more than 10 direct flights between Warsaw and Istanbul every week. Our business environment is quite favorable. We've got relatively low corporate income tax of 19%. A little bit higher personal income tax, but that's not a big concern for the investors. And we also have quite complicated system of value-added tax. On the right hand, you see the map of Poland divided in different wind zones. The most windy areas are the areas marked with number 1, and they are mostly in north of Poland, but you can also see them in central Poland. So the wind investments are dispersed all over the country with higher penetration on the north, while most of our industry is located on the south of the country. So there is also some transmission congestions connected with this fact. But fortunately, we are not as a large country as Brazil, and the distances to cover are measured in hundreds of kilometers, not in thousands of kilometers. You can see here on the left side the map of our transmission system. It's pretty well developed all over the country. Although, as I said, it was designed to transfer the capacity from southern Poland, where there are coal mines and coal plants, to the northern part of Poland. Now, with the development of the wind industry, the flows of the energy are being reversed, and that requires quite a lot of investment into the transmission and distribution system. The distribution system is divided among 4 distributors, 4 companies. Both transmission operator and distribution companies are state-controlled companies. The transmission system is 100% state-owned. The distribution companies are mixed private state-owned capital, but they are controlled by the government, and it's quite important for the whole industry. In terms of the size, we are not probably the biggest market, especially in comparison with countries like China, Germany, or Spain. But we are just after Brazil. We now have installed about 4,000 megawatt of capacity, and if you look among the worldwide capacity installed, this is only 1%. Although in Europe we are, let's say, medium-sized market, and in relative terms, if you compare Poland to Brazil, you see that this is a pretty large and dynamic market. If you look at the Polish renewable energy mix, the wind is quite important in that mix because it's about 40%, and it's growing, we do not have this good hydro conditions as Brazil, so the hydro represents in Poland only 11%, but we have a well-developed agriculture and wood industry. Therefore, the biomass sector in Poland is altogether more than 40%. What's important part of this biomass sector is working together with the coal industry in so-called co-firing, where the biomass is co-fired, and the banks declared that they will have no problem in financing the projects that will win the auction with the price, obviously, which is high enough to cover the repayment of the debt over the 15 years period. Among all the technologies, renewable technologies in Poland, wind is the cheapest technology. Therefore, in the auction system, it has a very good chances to succeed. Basically, Poland is creating a very predictable and stable system that works in other countries. There is a good potential for development of the wind as a minimum. As I said, it's between 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts to be added by the year 2020. After that, we will see how the energy policy and environmental policy of Europe will develop. Obviously, the auction system is favoring the investors with the lowest cost of capital, so it's rather favoring larger investors than small developers. But Poland is still not as competitive market as other Western European markets, so the returns that the project will generate in Poland should be a little bit higher than in other European countries, while the level of risk, the political and economical risk is exactly the same or even lower than in some of other European countries. Thank you very much. I hope that I made it in 15 minutes, and I will be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thanks very much. Interesting that moving to something like the CFD actually means that the banks view that as a more stable option than what you had before, than the green certificate system. I hope that that turns out to be the case in the UK, which is really the only place that has implemented this contract for difference scheme so far. And one matter which I understand is still completely unresolved in the UK system is who is ultimately legally responsible for making the payments. That will be tested as the first bank loans under the contract for difference scheme actually come to fruition. But who is it in the case of Poland? Who is ultimately backing up that cost?
In case of Poland, this cost will be covered by a special agency that was set up by the new Renewable Energy Act. It's 100% government-owned, and this agency will be responsible to collect so-called renewable fee together with all the energy bills being paid by the end users of the electricity.
So in other words, the government is assuming that responsibility. Yeah, I wish the UK government would actually just come out and do that. It would make life a lot simpler for people in the UK. Questions from the floor? Anybody interested in investing in Poland? The gentleman right here in the front. The microphone is on its way. If you could just please introduce yourself and then...
My name is Emre Otay. I am from Boğaziçi University, Istanbul. In Poland, you said there is a difference between less than 1 megawatt and more than 1 megawatt, which is similar to the new Turkish regulations. What is the main difference between these two plants, less than 1 or more than 1 megawatts, in terms of licensing, construction, and others?
Thank you for the question. That's a good point. We were in a long discussion with the government about this division, and it's purely arbitral. I mean, there is no other reason for that except that the government believes that there are certain technologies that are good to be developed only on a small scale. And this is for us quite unclear which technologies they mean. Probably solar, PV plants, but generally in Poland there is not a lot of small renewable installations. Because either in Poland you've got large biomass plants or large wind farms. And only now, with the cost reduction of PV modules, there is any chance to develop the PV sector in Poland, but rather on a residential level than on 1 megawatt level. So for us, it's not understandable. In my opinion, it was a political decision to show that the auctions are accessible also for smaller investors, but we still don't know who the smaller investors are going to be.
Gentleman here. Is that Ioannis? That is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, this is Yannis Tsipouridis from the Hellenic Wind Energy Association. I was wondering whether Poland, your government, is underestimating the percentage of renewables in the year 2050, given the target of very low or even zero carbon economy by then. I think, you know, the scope is even bigger. What do you think?
If I understood well your question, because it was not very well seen, your question was to say whenever we are going to reach our target of reduction of CO2?
I think the diagram you showed, it was estimated that by the year 2050, there will be 20 giga of wind. I think it's too low, given that by then we're going to reach a very low or even zero economy, carbon economy. So perhaps the government is underestimating your potential, and perhaps betting a lot on coal still.
Yes, you are right that this is probably not the maximum capacity of wind energy in Poland, although there is a problem between the theoretical capacity and practical capacity resulting from the social acceptance. Poland is a densely populated country, and therefore it's not easy to find spots where installation of wind would not create any local protests. And this is something which is already influencing the speed of adding the new capacity in Poland. There are several projects that are delayed because of the social protests. Therefore, I think that something between 20 and 25 is the really maximum capacity, plus you should take from this 20-something about 6,000 to 8,000 megawatts that will be built on Baltic Sea as an offshore wind energy. Because on onshore, the 20,000 is, in my opinion, from the social acceptance point of view, the maximum.
Okay. Gentleman here in the front.
Okay. My name is Hasan Erdoğan, Head of Department from Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. I have two small questions, Mr. Setnarski. In your presentation, you have mentioned that some distribution among the renewables. You have mentioned the coal fires. I would like to learn which kinds of fuels are there in this mix first. And as most of us know that Poland is a rich country in terms of coal potential, and one of the leading countries in terms of coal share in electricity generation, after Mongolia and South Africa somehow. And I would like to learn that, is there any pressure of EU targets among the implementation and operation of these coal-fired power plants in Poland first? And I would like to learn also, is there any relation somehow that between the this kind of rich coal reserves on the development of the wind sector? Thank you.
All right, so starting from the first question, the co-firing is recognized by the EU legislation as renewable technology. Although there is a lot of discussion whenever this technology is really contributing to the targets that are in front of the renewable energy industry, because it rather helps to preserve the existing coal-firing facilities by offering them premium from firing the biomass along with the coal, instead of creating a new renewable capacity. Although in Poland it used to be allowed, now the new legislation changed it and there will be no support for co-firing except few special cases. And what is used for co-firing is mostly agriculture or wood industry waste. And there is a lot of discussion about the classification of the waste, because obviously the energy industry is competing with, for example, furniture industry for the same raw material. But this is something that is going really to end up since the 1st of January of 2016. So this is rather a question of the past. The second question about the coal, this is a very difficult topic for Poland for the political reasons. Coal miners are one of the strongest unions in Poland, and they've got a lot of political influence. And Poland in this year is in the election year. So you can imagine that there is no reasonable discussion about the future of the coal energy in Poland in the election year, when the coal miners are the strongest, one of the strongest political lobbies. This is going obviously to change once the elections are over, because our obligations toward European regulations are very straightforward. The 2030 climate package is not leaving major space to maneuver for coal industry. Plus, and this is in my opinion the most important, coal mining in Poland is extremely expensive. We've got deep coal mines, 1,000 meter deep. We cannot compete in any way with the coal mines, for example, from South Africa. So Poland already today is importing like 15% of its coal consumption. And it's going to be, if we continue to support coal-fired power plants, we will continue to import coal, because we will not be able to mine the coal from Polish coal mines at competitive cost in the quantity that the Polish energy sector needs. So this is, in my opinion, the biggest problem that government has to face, that without turning into renewables, Poland is going to end up as a country with the most expensive electricity in Europe. Because also the CO2 credits that we received for free for some time being are going to end up one day. And then we will be in a very difficult situation. But as I said at the beginning, this government is not really able to address this issue. Only the new government after the election will have to tackle this. And the third question was about emissions. Coal-based methane, yes? The coal-based methane exists in Poland on a very local scale, and it's used in the cogeneration plants located on the coal mines to generate hot water and some electricity. But we didn't develop any major installation or technology for extracting the coal-based methane in Poland right now. So I don't see this is going to be any major technology for us for the time being.
Okay, thanks very much, Wojciech.
Thank you.
Again, Poland we could talk about for the rest of the afternoon and probably well into tomorrow. But now we move on to South Africa, where hopefully you won't be buying coal from South Africa anytime soon, or in any larger quantities anyway. Hopefully it will diminish. And it's my pleasure to introduce Johan van den Berg, who's the CEO of the South African Wind Energy Association and is an attorney who's been involved in the climate, space, and emissions trading, dispute resolution, and environmental law for the last 20 years or so. Johan. No, we've got extra.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. It's lovely to be in Istanbul. The previous time I came, I experienced the greatest hospitality ever as a student, and many years later, I find the same hospitality again in Turkey. So thank you very much. If you look at my first slide, it could also act as a summary of what I'm going to say, because what you see are faces of young people, and in South Africa, wind power and renewable energy is very much around people and ultimately sustainable development, and you'll see why when I go through my presentation. So if we just quickly look at the country, I think you know where it is, the name actually tells you, but there are about 50 million of us now. Our GDP is about 550 billion. When I wrote this, I said we were growing at 3%. I think it's probably a little bit optimistic now. It's closer to 2% now. But we're still a top 30 world economy. And then we have this very interesting situation where people say we're a little bit of a mixture. We're a little bit like the first world. We're a little bit like the third world. And depending on who you go and who you talk to, you can find both those elements in one country. So almost a mini globe in some ways. Our unemployment is quite high, and that leads us to many challenges. We'd like to think, although we're being challenged a little bit on that, but we like to think that we're the gate to sub-Saharan Africa. I think some other countries are snapping at our heels, but that's the way it used to be. But on the good side, we've been good at highly technological pursuits historically, all the way from very deep mining to in the bad old days, ammunitions manufacture of high technical complexity. Our legal system is a constitutional democracy. We've got an extremely modern constitution. When I was still a lawyer, I was very proud of this. I suppose I'm still proud of it. We got our constitution when most of the others in the world had already been written, so we had the opportunity to learn and take the best from everybody. Our legal system is mostly a common law system with Roman Dutch roots. Our commercial law is mostly from the English. So you see the footprints of all the colonial powers that were there in their day. And we've got a strong independent constitutional court. If we look at our energy sector, we've got about 46,500 megawatts installed, and I'm pleased to have updated this from the normal 45 because I said at some point we've got to start adding the renewables in. So the last 1,500 of that is all renewable energy that was installed in the last 2 years. Now I'll talk more about that a little bit. As in many other places, we've had a vertically integrated utility, which is called Eskom. And they did all the generation, transmission, and distribution. Our prices are regulated through a national energy regulator. And in the 90s and the 80s, when we had very cheap power, we attracted a lot of energy-intensive industry. A complexity is that the municipalities are funded by profit that they make on selling electricity, which doesn't really create an incentive for energy efficiency or even self-consumption or self-production with solar. Our carbon footprint is extremely high, and we've been in a long struggle to deregulate our energy sector and to find a vision for going forward. The policy is favorable to wind power, and our blueprint for energy, which is called the Integrated Resource Plan, it's a 20-year plan, and that talks about just below 9,000 megawatts of installed wind power by 2030. We've grown very quickly in renewable energy, as I'll talk about later. And then I think if there's one thing to remember about South Africa, localization, socio-economic development, and the advancement of the previously disadvantaged South Africans are incredibly important, all those factors. I think I talk again about this a little bit later on, but our bid system works 70% on price and 30% on socio-economic factors. And you can make a lot of mistakes in talking about this. The one mistake you can make is talking about the 30% as the soft issues. That's not the soft issue, that's the hard issue. And typically we kept wondering what was more important, and what we figured out lately is that you bid for the 70% in a bid round, but once you've bid, that tends to be forgotten. You bid whatever you bid and you were successful. But the 30% is what lives with you through the 20 years of the project lifetime. You know, are you really uplifting the communities? Are you really creating jobs? Are you really assisting enterprise development? So I'll talk a little bit more about that just now. Our prices have dropped a lot over the 3 rounds that we've had, and you must take into consideration that the exchange rate moved against us, so the figures that I show you here in dollars or euro terms are even more impressive than they actually would seem. So say 11 euro cents to 8 euro cents to 6 euro cents in the 3rd round, and projected at about, maybe with the new exchange rates, 5 euro cents in the 4th round. We've gone big quite quickly. So at the time when the largest wind farm in South Africa was a 5.2 megawatt pilot plant, we started building 140 megawatt wind farms. And now the average wind farms are larger than 80 megawatts. In the new rounds, almost all of them will be near the upper end of the cap, which is 140 megawatts. We have good wind, not like Brazil, but also not like France. So we're sitting at about 35% plus on a P50 for the successful projects. Here's a picture of the integrated resource plan that I showed you, and the circle on the right-hand side shows the renewables. The blue is the wind, the pink is the solar PV, and in the middle is the CSP. And that adds up to 17.8 gigawatts by 2030, which is also the 42% that our president committed to from new energy coming from renewables. He did that at the COP in Denmark. Recent developments make us think that we will accelerate the renewables portion because of problems we're having in the electricity sector, and if anything, this will happen at greater scale and sooner. So at the moment we're short of power because the new build coal is way behind schedule, and we're having some problems with the maintenance of our old coal fleet, and therefore with the availability. So we're having occasionally load shedding, which is very painful and unpopular, and something that we want to get out of as quickly as possible. However, there's not anything that can really, other than renewables, there's not really anything that can come before about 2020 to resolve this. So it's energy efficiency, demand management, or renewables. And the good news is that these procurement rounds are greatly oversubscribed, and there's 5,000 or 6,000 megawatts of all renewables ready to roll practically tomorrow, if that's what the government decides to do. So just to tell you in terms of finance, so this is a picture that shows the size of the government bailout of our national utility relative to our GDP, and that's next to the banking bailouts in some of the other jurisdictions. And you'll see while the banking bailouts were thought to be very high, they were all dwarfed by our utility bailout, except in the case of Ireland. So there's not a lot of space to continue pumping money into the utility, and independent power producers will probably become quite popular. This is the wind map, and as you know, the orange and yellow is the good news, and there's lots of it. The area that you see here is the southern part of the country around the coast that's been plotted so far in collaboration with the Research Center in Denmark and the UNDP. And just roughly speaking, I'd guess that this size of what you see here is larger than any country in Europe. So it's a very big land mass, It might be about the size, just bigger than Germany maybe. And so the rest of the country hasn't been plotted. There's lots of good wind sites, and some of these places, especially in the left top, is some of the fewest people in the world per kilometer live there. So you can really build wind farms there without annoying anybody. I've said already our procurement framework is 70% to price and 30% to socio-economic. And the way this works is there's a 50-kilometer radius defined around the project, whether it's wind or something else. And within that area, you have to make your pledges of what you're going to do if you're successful as a bidder. And it typically is around socio-economic development and enterprise development. And people then put money into education, schooling, frail care, street lights, all things like that that help the communities. And it's deep rural areas, so a little bit of money goes an incredibly long way. And really, we keep saying to each other, in the case of mining, they got community development wrong, and if we can get it half right, we will really make a huge difference. And ultimately, that creates political goodwill that keeps the policy behind us. So as the association, a huge amount of our time goes into administering the collaborative efforts around these socioeconomic benefits. Our process is the Rolls-Royce of bid systems, so that's the good and the bad news. The Rolls-Royce isn't cheap, but it works very well, and that's about the way it works. It's going to cost you not less than about $500,000 to get to the bid stage, and you will arrive with a big truck full of paper. In the first stages, it was about 7 copies of 5,000 pages each, so I think it's a little bit less now, and that's not very carbon neutral, I know. The way in which the industry has developed, for better or for worse, has led to the fact that the big and sophisticated players have been advantaged. So we've seen the likes of Enel, GDF, EDF, Global, Mainstream, Res, Dewey, others. All the big international, well, almost all the big international players are there. And the contract is ultimately underwritten by the Treasury, so there's not risk in terms of utility credit rating. This is a slightly silly graph that shows you the cumulative growth in South Africa. It literally goes off the charts, and that's going from 10 megawatts to 670 in just over 1 year. And that pattern is to be repeated. There's another 1,300 or so megawatts already in the procurement system, coming at about 600 per year. And we hope we can just continue that for as long as possible. There's megawatts installed per annum. This is a bit of a guess of what we think might happen if we put various policy and other things together, and it shows you about 6,000 megawatts by 2020, with the ultimate potential being somewhere between 20 and 30,000 megawatts, depending how you define it. So already what we're seeing in the planning says that we will grow to a $20 billion industry by 2030. At the moment, we're already about a $5 billion industry, just as wind. And that would make us a very significant infrastructure sector in the country. If we then just spend the last few minutes of my talk looking slightly broader, we also still part of a continent that's incredibly impoverished in terms of energy. So some 600 million people in Africa don't have power. And we really think that some of the South African successes can be rolled out into Africa. I think it'll be a completely different model. I don't think it's large on-scale utility scale power. It's probably mid-scale and small-scale distributed generation, but there's really a big potential for that. If we look at the challenges and solutions, I suppose the very strong competitive nature of our process is great for government because they get power at very low prices, despite reasonably high cost of capital in the country. But it is a problem for people who want to play there because you don't know that you'll be successful. The solution there is to find good wind sites, secure low cost of capital, and what I didn't say there perhaps is partner with local players that know what's going on and that have already done the rounds in their pickup truck to find the good sites. Grid access, as Paolo mentioned this morning, it is becoming an issue. I think we can do quite a bit more before we get stuck with it, probably 4 or 5 years from now. But that might mean going to where the grid can take us rather than going where we'd ideally like to be. So good feasibility study and a long-term view, and scheduling your project to walk step in step with the grid expansion is a good idea. The complex bid rules, that's only some, many lawyers have done this now and they know how it works. It doesn't have to be a stumbling block to anybody. And then ultimately the economic development and socio-economic developments, I cannot stress strongly enough that you've got to buy into the spirit of this. You've got to play by what people are trying to achieve. It's definitely not a box-ticking exercise. So embrace the paradigm, appoint experts, and make sure that the people who deal with this are not at the bottom of the food chain in the company, but sit maybe just below the CEO. Then again, looking at the African picture, energy storage is becoming very interesting. Lots of international studies and pilot programs. If there's one continent where this is very interesting because of its mere size and the impossibility of feeding it with one grid, it's Africa. And South Africa is a very good place to run pilot projects on all these things. As you know, just as an aside at the moment, it's ironic that we have excess storage capacity in the way of pumped storage that we can't fill because we just don't have enough power to pump the water up the hill when we don't need it. So we can probably build lots more renewables at almost no cost. GWEC in its strategy meeting some year or two ago identified the East African Wind Corridor as a global #1 target, hotspot. And this is sort of northern Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti. Unbelievably good wind regime there. I know the Lake Turkana project in Kenya is reaching capacity factors that Vestas say they've never heard of anywhere else in the world. And I'm somewhat hesitant to quote from memory what they are, but they were far above 50%. So in terms of taking wind to its ultimate potential, and that's one place we can go. Generally, I think we need to strengthen regional grids, and if we can unlock some of the hydro, I think that'll be something that goes well with wind. There's just a graph I always love to use because it shows you how big Africa is. And at the bottom, for those who can't see, the blue is the United States. This is all according to scale. On the right-hand side is India, then the left is Mexico, at the top is China, and the middle is Europe. And that just, if you look at that, that's all you need to know about the fact that there will never be one super grid in Africa that goes to every village. It just will not happen. So we're perfectly positioned for a more modern way of doing things. This is William Kamkwamba. He built his own generator from the library book, and scrap metal and various materials. He's now studying engineering in the United States. And so, I think that's a very inspiring story, and it just shows us the need and again the opportunities. And then lastly, maybe sustainable development. I've spoken a little bit about this. What we spend on community and enterprise development is about 2% of turnover, which ultimately goes into the tariff. And it's a very interesting model where the government effectively says to us, we're struggling to reach some of these places fully. Maybe you can assist us and we can develop it together. The red line shows you the community trust dividends. So the communities have shareholding ranging between 5% and 40%, and that's lent to them. They don't pay for that. They pay it back from dividends. So in the later years of the project, that becomes extremely large amounts. While the blue line shows you the much more steady stream of contributions into economic and socio-economic development that we think can really create a case study for sustainable development around renewable energy, because the renewables by its very nature is already sustainable. If you can uplift the community, then that people, planet, prosperity, which is often a fiction and becomes a bit of reality. So we think we can roll the South African model into Africa, and we think we'll be quite busy in the years going forward, and we're very excited about it. We're very keen to work with not just other people but other continents in line with the theme of this conference. Thank you very much.
Okay. There were headlines a few weeks ago about, well, there's been discussions about whether or not ESCOM remains solvent, or whether it might be reduced to junk bond status. And then we saw the government basically remove their senior management team about 10 days ago and replace them with government officials. How would you expect that drama to play out over the next couple of years? Because, I mean, as you say, the existing contract system is in fact backed by the sovereign, but if the sovereign is declared bankrupt or reduced in, if the utility that's paying the bill is reduced to junk bond status, that becomes a problem.
Yeah, so the utilities credit rating is already, and with 2 of the rating agencies, down to junk status. The sovereign credit rating seems to be holding at this point in time, so if that persists, then the problem doesn't really arise. But indirectly, this is a very interesting question, because when your utility is in serious trouble, people get very worried, and government starts to think very deeply about everything, which in principle is a good idea. But it means that the more important something is sometimes the longer it takes to resolve, for the very fact that there's so much going on and so many asteroids coming at them at the same time, if I can use that metaphor. So I expect to see some disruption of the procurement process, maybe some delays, but at the same time, when it gets unstuck, I expect that the rollout of renewables will actually be accelerated. So in the 4th round, which is about to be announced any day now, touch wood, if I can find any. It might be delayed, but almost certainly the megawatts allocated will be more than what was announced. So, I mean, the ultimate theme out of that is a degree of disruption that leads to super great opportunity for renewables and wind. And I think there's a degree of pain in that and a huge amount of opportunity, and that's where we're going to be for the next few years.
Okay, questions from the floor? Gentleman here in the front.
Hi. Hi, Johan. Thank you very much for this presentation. My name is Geoffrey Dupuy. I'm working for Make, market analyst. I was just wondering, you said that South Africa is a gate for sub-Saharan Africa. We have heard a couple of weeks ago that Siemens has made an announcement in Egypt for a blade factory. I mean, we know that South Africa is a little bit more complicated, short-term uncertainty, but in the same time, the LCR, I mean, the local content requirement, is getting higher and higher. So we imagine at some point seeing some component manufacturers, located in South Africa. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, what's your opinion on that? Do you expect any other than tower, any component manufacturers to be located in South Africa anytime soon?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. So our ambition around local content is somewhere between 60 and 70%, and our reality is about 46%. There's been a localization study done that's just being finalized, and the roadmap says that the next big step we can take is to bring a blade manufacturer. And we have been, in various occasions, extremely close to getting one across the line and into the country, and I think you know which one I refer to. And if they come, that'll take us to mid-50s or more of local content. And if we bring the right one, they'll be certified to work on a variety of turbines as well. After that, local content will rise if we can do local assembly, which means that we can put the components in. But I think politically, if we can bring the tower manufacturer in addition to the the blade manufacturer in addition to the 2 tower manufacturers we already have, and the cement towers we're already making, I think we'll be in the green for a good few years before we have to worry about that again. No.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? I guess it's coffee break time. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, and please join me in thanking all the panelists for very interesting presentations. Thank you.